I'm just going to read you, it's not that long, it's about 10, 15 minutes, somewhere in between. And it's called Stories of Brigid, Godess and Saint. And that's kind of what I do, is I kind of retell myths from the woman's perspective. And this is my rendition of Brigid. So it's a bit like, I feel very humbled from everything that's been here today, because, you know, I'm not a scholar, just a writer. Okay, so Stories of Brigid, Goddess and Saint. And if anybody isn't familiar, there's one word in there called plomos. Yeah, it means empty flattery. Yeah. Okay. In the country, in the dead of night, islanded amid a sea of sleep, two hearts beat. While animals twitched and men dreamed, night hosted the unknown. Country roads away, a midwife walked, bringing herbs and prayers under a sea of stars. They knew I was coming. There were signs, portents, shapes in the clouds. The moon shone bright as my mother inched me in like the tide, until I came to her shore, slid my way to her breast for the milk that was mine. Her name was Brigid, slave to a man called Duftok, who was known to be halfway in and halfway out of this world. He needed a slave, he said. So then I can be away from domestic underling tasks, to be free to go to my wattles and my chance to work the magic I call for the healing of strife. That's my task in life. He was a man of great things, speaking to kings who would hang on his every word so their worlds wouldn't end. Every day, she cooked and cleaned, swept and shone, and when he was gone, she'd scatter fresh straw on the floor with a song. As a child, I thought about fire. I saw men melting metal, shaping wheels and swords. I saw women rub stones together. I dreamed a fire was burning in my heart, so fierce that I screamed into the quiet night. Duftok went wild. He thought his house was burning. He called on us to fetch water. He had no idea where the buckets were kept, but there was no fire. I was only dreaming, I said. I had no idea the light in me was as strong as it was. I was too young to know what was normal for a child to feel in the middle of the night. But over time, he saw that I was kind. He saw me pray to everything, to every task, in the milk I poured, in the beer I brewed, in the bread I made. And he took to my ways and kindled his fire, washed his own hair, and tidied his bed along with prayer, and was able to see his way to set my mother free. It was thought I'd been married. They found me a man, but I took the eye out of his head for not looking at me right. If he had looked, he would have seen the way the road rose with me when I walked, but all he saw was a strangeness in me that frightened him. I could feel his relief as he went away. No, I didn't marry, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wanted to be with the dawn, have time for the seasons, for spring making a pain in my heart, the fledgling states of all things in their naked broken-heartedness. I shuddered for spring, for birds with their high filled-out chests made for singing, their self-importance, how the smallest bird can show the wonder of a single lie. I sat under the rain and fasted. I was slashed by the cold in the mountains. I lay naked under the burning sun. I forged a sword with light from the heavens. I gave in to a gentle stream that would divide two fields as nature had intended. My smile became white stone smoothed by the sea with salt and grit. You can trust the surface of a stone not to change through many lifetimes. Then my stories began. I sat with a dying man. He was old, deaf as a log, mute panic alive in his eyes. How do I die? I picked a bunch of rushes lying golden on the floor. I wove them into the 4 seasons. We held our 4 hands together until the rushes became a prayer that lorded over his loose skin with age lurking in every fold. The prayer went straight into the bright of his eyes. He remembered a kiss. He remembered a dance. He told me to dance in rhythm with the waves. He told me to frighten like a storm, to howl with the wind. He said it all with his eyes. The next day was the 1st of spring. The ground opened for him like a mother, cradling him in. just as everything was starting up again. He went the same way as flowers do when their time comes. I have another story about a man who kept hens and a king who had a pet fox. The fox was full of cuteness and plenty of tricks, so the king could laugh himself into forgetting there's a killer in a fox. The animal was favoured so much that he was free to roam as if there was no wildness in him, but there was. The fox killed the man's hens, and the ones he didn't kill stopped laying from fright. Then the children stopped dancing and singing at his door for spare eggs. So the man killed the fox because he had nothing to give anymore, and that broke his heart. While his heart was breaking, the king was going wild under his robes. But the king knew how to be clever with his rage, saying he'd spare the man's life if he found him a fox just like the one that was lost. It was a mean solution, because the man would have to plumb off a new fox for years to get him to be like the other one. So I told the man to catch a fox. I whispered a prayer in the creature's ear, and the fox put on a great show. The king laughed his head off, and everyone heard him laugh, so the man was allowed to go home. But afterwards the fox forgot all the tricks and went back to the wild. The king had to sit back down with his rage shaking under his robes. After a while the hens began to lay again, and the children came back, singing and dancing at his door. Fire was my food. I would think about the fire in the sun. I believed in the sun because I could see it. I believed in the fire in my heart because I could feel it. When you believe in things, even little things, small as ants working together in harmony, they shine brighter. Animals showed me how to live simply. I was born into minding them, and they minded me back, as their loyalty to nature pointed me to the half-light in mankind and the shadows of things to come. Flowers became like little keys opening into the earth's darkness, into human darkness too. There was poor King Lowry with his big horse's ears, and all he suffered from people laughing at him. He came to me crying and hurt by ridicule. I told him to put his head on my lap. I prayed over his big heart so he might have relief. His big ears disappeared. He had normal ears after that, because prayers said with charity go straight into the kind spirit living in all things. And there was a girl swelling with child, and instead of making smiles, she made gossip. She had broken a promise to be chaste for her life when she was too young to know the strength of the nature inside her. It was going to be terrible for her. She would be judged, slandered, even slaughtered by people who forgot that everything in nature makes love. I put my hand on her belly and I prayed for the right thing. She bled after that. As time went by, prayers smiled back at me, even in fun. Like the day I was hanging out my wet clothes, wishing for a cleaner branch to hang them on, and lo and behold, the branch became a sunbeam before my very eyes. The clothes were dry in a minute, which was no surprise, since it was pure sunlight they were hanging on. I was folding them as quick as I was hanging them out, but that was seen by one, and so everyone heard, along with Patrick, who used to pick up the shamrocks to show about Jesus and his Father and the Holy Spirit, 3 leaves on the one stem. Patrick had heard about me and sunbeams, how people had taken me to their hearts, so he took me seriously. Once he called me to help a woman who was swelling with child. She said it was Patrick's assistant, Brone, who was the father. Brone denied the claim, and I could see Patrick had faith in the man, so I said to the woman, "If you're telling lies, your tongue will swell up." It swelled, and they wanted to burn her child and all, so I said, "Who here has no lies? You have her terrified into lying." And I said she will have her child, and it will bring its own heartbreak the way life does. But her child will be good. She will never do what you want to do to her mother today. And how do we know it wasn't one of you who gave her the child? How do we know she is not protecting one of you with her love? All their heads went down fast, for they all feared I'd have their tongues swelling too. She fell at my feet, and I didn't like it, so I asked her to stand and look me in the eye, and she did, and I said, "Be a good mother." I made it my business after that to find a recipe. I made it with my praying hands, with kelp and sea lettuce, honey and fruit juice. It was a concoction to put a stop to a man's seed from making its way into the womb of a woman, so she wouldn't have 20 children. All through that time, Patrick was baptizing the people into his new church. He asked for my help, and I said I would. I didn't want the people to give up on their hearts for the pillars that were coming. I told them they already knew the Holy Spirit. I told them not to be swallowing everything whole, or we'd forget the animals and the birds and the fires in our souls that we didn't want quenched. I was afraid of those new mornings when the horizon was a thick black line under an ominous cobalt streaking into grey, only becoming blue when it was closer to the sky. I cried for the days when sea and sky would breeze up matching shades that were all in harmony. It was as if creatures with cold shoulders were spewing that thick black line, trying to divide heaven and earth. That's how I knew the pillars were coming. So I made a church of my own to hold the stories, those little miracles of my life. I asked the Holy Spirit to keep my stories alive. There was a wealthy chieftain in my homeland of Kildare. I asked him for some land, and though I knew his purse was tight, I also knew he wouldn't say no because he had heard of me. He wouldn't have looked good saying no to such as myself. He said, "You can have as much as your cloak can cover." I prayed to the dew, the sacred dew that comes with the dawn, and it filled up my cloak. The cloak spread for a mile until he begged me to stop. So I asked it to stop with pity for his meanness. I had more than enough. I knew an acorn to be as good a start as any, taking years to grow, but grow it will, high and strong. It's as simple as that. Planted in the earth, under the sun, and it will tell the story of the seasons. I planted an oak tree because I knew the straight pillars were coming. I knew the crookedness of a tree would tell us what to do, and it did. It told us to make a garden, tend to it softly, speak to the flowers as they grow. Spend time there every day, then place that garden in your soul. When people heard about my cloak, they caught up their old clothes, though they didn't have many, and they left the rags out in the grass to be doused by the morning dew. They would wipe a sick woman's forehead with the dew-doused rags so she'd be blessed whether she was to go or to stay. Then people would tie the rags to a bush. Bushes, all dressed up in colour like little girl churches. Then the pillars veiled me, but my story stayed on in the grass, in the ditch, in the hair, the hearts of people and the river who spoke tender words to me on my last night as she flowed me down through her rushes, taking me